Imagine waking up in the morning, picking up your phone, and seeing 200 missed calls and 84 panicked voicemails from your own family. When I played the very first voicemail, I heard my mother absolutely sobbing. She was screaming, "Janifa, please pick up the phone. Your sister's wedding is falling apart. The groom's father is canceling everything. Our business is going to be ruined. Please, you have to come back." I just set my phone down on my desk and let out a soft laugh. Because you have no idea what this exact same woman's voice sounded like just 48 hours ago. Just think about it. 5 years ago, my family kicked me out of the house for absolutely no reason. But 5 years later, I swallowed my pride and decided to attend my younger sister's wedding. I even brought a small gift box that I had bought with my own hard-earned money. But the second I stepped into that luxurious wedding hall, right in front of the city's most elite guests and the groom's billionaire family, my mother blocked my path. She looked at my simple dress with absolute disgust and yelled, "What are you doing here? A poor, pathetic girl like you has no place at a VIP wedding like this. Security, throw her out." I was publicly humiliated and escorted out. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't argue. I simply walked over, placed my small gift box into my sister's hands, and quietly walked out the doors. My family thought they had won. They thought they had successfully humiliated the poor daughter. But they had absolutely no clue that the small gift box I left in my sister's hands contained something that was about to shatter their entire world. I know you want to find out exactly what was inside that box that made the groom's billionaire family threaten to cancel the wedding, and why the mother who threw me out like a stray dog was suddenly calling me 200 times, begging for my mercy. I promise you, the ending of this video is going to give you absolute, pure satisfaction. So please, stay with me until the very end. Before we start, if you're watching my story on YouTube, please show some love and subscribe to the channel. And if you're on Facebook, hit that follow button to stay by my side. Has your family ever humiliated you like this? Let me know in the comments. So, let's rewind the clock to that wedding night, and let me tell you how one tiny gift box birthed the greatest revenge of my life. To understand why I left that specific gift in my sister's hands, you first need to understand the absolute nightmare I had to survive 5 years ago. I grew up in a household where love wasn't something you were just given. It was something you had to earn. My parents didn't care about kindness, character, or happiness. They only cared about 3 things: status, money, and appearances. My younger sister, Chloe, was the ultimate golden child. She was beautiful. She never argued with my parents, and her only goal in life was to marry into a wealthy family to secure her future. They treated her like a princess. And then, there was me. I didn't want to be a trophy wife. I didn't care about going to country club dinners or wearing designer dresses just to impress people I didn't even like. I wanted to build my own life. I wanted to start my own business. And because I didn't fit into their perfect, wealthy aesthetic, I was a constant source of embarrassment to them. When I turned 22, my father sat me down in his study. He didn't ask me what I wanted for my future. He simply handed me a piece of paper and told me he had arranged a marriage for me with the son of his wealthiest business partner. The guy was 10 years older than me, incredibly arrogant, and entirely controlling. My father saw it as a brilliant corporate merger. He saw me as a piece of property. When I looked my father in the eyes and told him I wouldn't do it, the room went completely dead. I will never forget the look of pure, unadulterated hatred that washed over my father's face. He stood up, pointed a trembling finger at the front door, and screamed at the top of his lungs. "If you walk out of this house to pursue your stupid, pathetic little business dreams, you are dead to us. You will have no family, no money, and you will end up starving on the streets like a beggar." My mother stood right next to him, her arms crossed. She didn't shed a single tear. She didn't try to stop me. She just looked at me with cold disgust. So, I left. I walked out of that massive mansion with nothing but a single duffel bag and $300 in my checking account. Let me tell you something about starting from absolute zero when the people who are supposed to protect you actively want you to fail. It is terrifying. For the first 2 years, I almost did starve. I lived in a tiny, freezing apartment where the heater barely worked. I worked 3 exhausting jobs just to keep the lights on. I waitressed during the day, cleaned offices at night, and every single free second I had, I poured into building my real estate investment firm. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a family to fall back on. If I failed, I had nothing. But let me tell you a secret about rejection. When the people you love tell you that you are worthless, you either let it destroy you, or you use it as the most powerful fuel in the world. I chose the fuel. Over the next 5 years, I worked like an absolute machine. I barely slept. I took massive, calculated risks. My small firm started flipping distressed residential properties. Then, we moved up to commercial buildings. I had a natural instinct for the market, and I negotiated with a cold-blooded precision that terrified men twice my age. By the time I turned 27, my company was managing portfolios worth tens of millions of dollars. I owned a penthouse overlooking the city. I had an army of employees. I had become one of the youngest and most ruthless CEOs in the city's real estate market. I had built an absolute empire from nothing. But because I kept my personal life strictly out of the media and never posted on social networks, my family had absolutely no idea. To them, I was still the stubborn, broke, runaway daughter who had ruined her life. For 5 years, there was absolute radio silence. No phone calls, no text messages, no birthdays. I was a ghost. Until one quiet Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my mahogany desk when my assistant brought in the mail. Sitting on top of the pile was a thick, heavy, gold-embossed envelope. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a wedding invitation. My younger sister, Chloe, was getting married to the son of a local billionaire. I stared at the delicate calligraphy for a long time. My logical brain told me to shred it and throw it in the trash. I told myself I didn't need them anymore. But deep down, beneath the expensive power suits and the CEO attitude, a small part of me still missed my little sister. I thought to myself, maybe enough time has passed. Maybe I can just show up quietly, give her a beautiful, life-changing gift to show her I still care, and silently make peace. I packed a small velvet gift box and headed to the venue. I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing. I had absolutely no idea I was walking straight into the most brutal public execution of my life. The wedding was held at the Grand Monarch, the most exclusive, outrageously expensive 5-star hotel in the entire state. It was the kind of place where you couldn't even get past the front gates unless your net worth had at least 7 zeros in it. I could have easily pulled up to the venue in my chauffeur-driven Bentley. I could have worn a $15,000 custom designer gown and covered myself in diamonds just to prove to my parents that I had made it. But I didn't. I didn't go there to show off, and I certainly didn't want to upstage my little sister on her wedding day. So, I took an Uber. I wore a very simple, elegant, understated black dress. I wore no flashy jewelry. I just wanted to blend into the background, hand my sister her gift, and leave a quiet message of peace. As I walked up the grand marble steps of the hotel, I held my clutch purse tightly against my chest. Inside it was a small, dark blue velvet box. I want to tell you what was inside that box, because it's important you understand my intentions. It wasn't a necklace. It wasn't a pair of earrings. Folded neatly inside that little velvet box was the official, fully paid-off deed to a $2 million luxury beach house, registered entirely in my sister's name. And clipped to the deed was my premium black metal CEO business card with my direct private number. Why did I buy her a house? Because I knew exactly what it felt like to be thrown out onto the streets by our parents. I knew what it felt like to have absolutely no safety net. Even though she was marrying into a billionaire family, I wanted to make sure my little sister always had a home that belonged entirely to her, no matter what happened in her life. I took a deep breath, handed my invitation to the heavily armed security guards at the front doors, and stepped inside the grand ballroom. Let me paint a picture of this wedding for you. It was breathtakingly excessive. There were towering walls of white roses, massive crystal chandeliers dripping from the ceiling, and waiters in white gloves walking around with trays of $1,000 champagne. The room was packed with about 400 of the city's most elite individuals, politicians, real estate tycoons, and old money billionaires. I stood near the back of the room, sipping a glass of sparkling water, just watching the crowd. Across the room, I spotted the groom's family. You could immediately tell who they were. The groom's father, a famously ruthless billionaire businessman, was standing in the center of the room like a king holding court. People were literally lining up just to shake his hand and laugh at his jokes. And standing right next to him, laughing the loudest, were my parents. My father was wearing a tuxedo that looked brand new, puffing his chest out, trying desperately to look like he belonged in the same tax bracket as the groom's father. My mother was covered in pearls, smiling so widely it looked like her face might crack. They were basking in the glory of marrying their golden daughter into a billionaire empire. Then I saw her. My sister, Chloe. She was standing near the main stage in a stunning white wedding dress. She looked beautiful. For a split second, all the anger, all the resentment, and all the pain of the last 5 years just melted away. In that moment, I wasn't a cold-blooded CEO, and she wasn't the golden child. We were just two sisters. I took a deep, trembling breath. I tightened my grip on my purse, stepping out of the shadows and into the bright lights of the ballroom. I started walking toward my family. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. I told myself, just smile. Give her the box. Tell her you love her. I was about 20 feet away when my mother happened to turn her head. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and then they locked directly onto me. I gave her a soft, hopeful, nervous smile, but my mother didn't smile back. The warmth completely drained from her face. Her eyes widened in absolute horror, as if she had just spotted a cockroach crawling across the 5-star dinner table. She quickly tapped my father on the shoulder and pointed at me. My father turned around. His face instantly went red with pure, unadulterated rage. I stopped walking. The knot in my stomach turned into a block of solid ice. I knew right then and there I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. When my father saw me standing there, he didn't even hesitate. He didn't pull me aside into a quiet hallway. He didn't ask me why I was there. He just started marching straight toward me, and my mother was right on his heels. By this point, a few of the wealthy guests had noticed the sudden shift in my parents' body language, and people started turning their heads to look at me. The polite chatter around us started to die down. My father stopped right in front of me. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple black dress and my lack of jewelry. His face was practically twisted with disgust. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice low but shaking with absolute fury. "Dad," I whispered, keeping my voice as calm and soft as possible. "I got the invitation. I just came to see Chloe. I just wanted to give her my gift and congratulate her." My mother stepped out from behind him, her eyes flashing with pure venom. "You got an invitation because of a mailing list error from the wedding planner. Do you seriously think we would invite you to a night like this? Look at you." She gestured toward my clothes, making sure the billionaire guests standing nearby could hear her. "This is the most important night of your sister's life," my mother continued, her voice rising in pitch. "She is marrying into one of the most powerful families in this state, and you show up here looking like some common street beggar? Do you have any idea how embarrassing you are to us?" I felt my face burn hot with humiliation. Dozens of people were openly staring at us now. I could hear whispers echoing in the quiet ballroom. I looked over my father's shoulder and saw the groom's billionaire father watching the scene with a confused frown on his face. I looked back at my parents, desperately trying to keep the tears from falling. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I pleaded softly. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to hand my sister this box, tell her I love her, and I will leave immediately. I promise." I tried to take a step past them toward Chloe, who was standing on the stage, watching us with wide, nervous eyes. But my father aggressively stepped in my way, completely blocking my path. "You are not going anywhere near her," my father snarled. He raised his hand and pointed his finger right at my face. And then he raised his voice so loudly that it echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "You are not a part of this family," he yelled, making sure every single VIP guest in that room heard him clearly. "You chose the streets 5 years ago, and that is where you belong. You are a poor, pathetic failure, and you have no place in a room with these people." My heart physically shattered. My own father was standing in front of 400 of the wealthiest people in the city, screaming at me like I was a criminal who had snuck into a palace. He didn't even give me a chance to respond. He turned his head and snapped his fingers at the 2 massive, armed security guards standing by the entrance. "Security!" my father barked. "This woman is trespassing. Remove her from the premises immediately. Do whatever you have to do. Just get her out of my sight." The 2 huge guards immediately started walking toward me, their hands resting on their radios. The entire ballroom was dead silent. Every single eye was glued to me. I saw wealthy women covering their mouths, whispering to their husbands. I saw my sister, the bride, look down at the floor and turn her back to me, too afraid to stand up to our parents. But you know what? I didn't cry. 5 years ago, I would have broken down and sobbed right there on the carpet. But I wasn't that scared, helpless little girl anymore. I was a CEO, and I knew how to walk away with my dignity. I looked my father dead in the eyes. I didn't yell. I didn't insult him. I just gave him a cold, hollow look. "Okay," I whispered. I turned away from him and looked toward the stage. "Congratulations, Chloe," I said clearly. Then I reached out and gently placed the dark blue velvet box onto the edge of a nearby catering table. I turned around, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and walked straight out of the grand ballroom before the security guards could even lay a hand on me. I walked out the heavy front doors and stepped into the cool night air. I got into the back of an Uber, gave the driver my address, and stared out the window at the passing city lights. My parents thought they had won. They thought they had successfully humiliated the poor, runaway daughter and protected their fake, rich image in front of the groom's billionaire family. They were so arrogant, so blinded by their own ego, that they didn't even bother to check what was inside the box I left behind. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the car window and let out a soft, dark laugh. Because I knew that when my sister finally opened that box later tonight, my family's perfect, luxurious little world was going to violently explode. I want you to try and picture what happened inside that luxurious ballroom right after I walked out the doors. Because I didn't find out the exact details until much later, but when I did, it made perfect sense. After I was kicked out, my parents immediately went into damage control. They plastered those fake, perfect smiles back onto their faces and started walking around the room, apologizing to the VIP guests, laughing it off, and calling me a troubled, estranged relative who just wanted to cause a scene and beg for money. They played the victims perfectly. and the wedding carried on. A few hours later, the dinner was over, the cake was cut, and the guests were starting to leave. The groom's family, the billionaire father, the mother, and a few senior executives from his company, had gathered in a private VIP lounge near the back of the hall with my parents and my sister Chloe. It was an intimate, post-wedding family gathering. My parents were completely relaxed, sipping their expensive scotch, finally feeling like they had officially secured their place in high society. That's when one of the bridesmaids walked into the lounge. She was carrying the small, dark blue velvet box I had left on the catering table. She walked over and handed it to Chloe. "Your sister left this for you before she left," the bridesmaid said quietly. The mood in the room instantly dropped. My father let out a harsh groan, rubbing his temples like the mere mention of my existence gave him a headache. "Just throw it in the trash, Chloe," my mother snapped, taking a sip of her champagne. "It's probably just some cheap, pathetic trinket she bought at a pawn shop to make us feel guilty. We don't need garbage in this family." Chloe looked down at the velvet box in her hands. For a second, she actually hesitated. Maybe a small part of her felt guilty for not defending me. Or maybe she was just curious. Either way, she didn't throw it in the trash. She slowly opened the lid. My parents were watching her, expecting her to pull out a cheap silver necklace or a tacky bracelet. But Chloe didn't pull out jewelry. She reached into the box and pulled out a thick, folded piece of premium, legal-grade parchment paper, and clipped to the top of that paper was a sleek, heavy, matte black metal business card. Chloe unfolded the paper. She started to read the bold, formal text at the top of the page. And as her eyes moved down the document, her face went completely pale. Her hands started to shake so violently that the paper actually rattled in her grip. "What is it, sweetheart?" the groom asked, noticing her sudden panic. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the paper. He froze. His jaw practically hit the floor. "What? What is it?" my father demanded, stepping forward, suddenly looking annoyed. "Did she write some pathetic, insulting letter? Give it to me." My father snatched the paper out of Chloe's hands. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at it. I can only imagine the absolute shock that must have short-circuited my father's brain in that exact second. It wasn't an apology letter. It wasn't a cheap trinket. It was a fully notarized, legally binding property deed for a luxury oceanfront beach house located in the most exclusive neighborhood in the state. And printed clearly at the bottom of the deed was the purchase price, paid in full, $2 million in cash. The property was registered entirely in Chloe's name, as a gift. My father stopped breathing. He stared at the $2 million number over and over again, completely unable to process it. The man who had just screamed at me in front of 400 people for being a poor, pathetic failure was now holding a $2 million cash receipt from the daughter he threw away. I don't understand," my mother stammered, looking at the deed over his shoulder. Her voice was trembling. "Where did she get this? This has to be a fake. It's a prank." But it wasn't a fake. And the groom's billionaire father, who had been sitting quietly on the leather sofa watching this entire scene unfold, suddenly noticed something else. He stood up, walked over to my father, and pointed at the sleek black metal business card that was still clipped to the top of the deed. He pulled the card off the paper and held it up to the light. And when that billionaire businessman read the name printed in gold letters on that card, the entire room descended into absolute, terrifying chaos. The groom's father was a man who commanded absolute respect. He was a self-made billionaire, the kind of guy who could make or break an entire company with a single phone call. He had been quiet all night, observing my family, trying to figure out exactly what kind of people his son had married into. He stared at that black metal business card in his hand for a long, heavy moment. Printed in sharp gold lettering across the matte black surface was my name, my direct private number, and the title, Chief Executive Officer, Vanguard Equity Partners. He didn't hand the card back. His face didn't show shock. It showed a terrifying, Cold realization. He looked up slowly from the card and locked eyes with my father. "Richard," the billionaire said, his voice dangerously low. "The young woman who was just standing in the grand ballroom. The one you screamed at. The one you ordered security to throw out like a stray dog. You're telling me that was Emily? Your oldest daughter?" My father swallowed hard. He was sweating now. The arrogant, puffed-out chest from earlier was completely gone. "Yes, Richard, but you have to understand, she's—" "Shut up," the billionaire snapped, his voice cracking like a whip across the quiet lounge. My father's mouth snapped shut. My mother physically flinched, shrinking back into her husband's arm. Even the groom looked terrified of his own father. "Do you have any idea who that woman is?" the billionaire demanded, stepping closer to my parents, completely invading their space. "Do you have any idea what you just did in front of my guests?" My parents just stood there, looking at him like a pair of terrified children. They had spent the entire night trying to impress this man, and now he was looking at them with absolute disgust. Vanguard Equity Partners is the most aggressive, most successful private investment firm on the entire East Coast, he said, speaking slowly, so every single word hit them like a physical blow. "For the last 6 months, my company has been desperately trying to secure a meeting with the CEO of Vanguard to save a failing commercial real estate project we're tied up in. I have been practically begging her secretary just to get 10 minutes on her calendar. And tonight, she walked into my son's wedding." He paused, looking at my parents with a mixture of disbelief and pure anger. "The CEO of Vanguard Equity walked into this room to hand your daughter a $2 million cash asset as a wedding gift," he continued. "And instead of introducing me to her, you stood in front of 400 of the most powerful people in this city, called her a poor, pathetic failure, and had my security guards physically drag her out into the street." My mother actually started to cry. She brought her hands up to her mouth, shaking her head. "We didn't know," she whimpered, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "We swear we didn't know it was her company. She never told us." "You didn't know," the billionaire repeated, letting out a harsh, mocking laugh. "She is your own daughter. How do you not know she runs a $100 million empire? What kind of parents are you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back on them and looked at his son. "This is exactly what I warned you about," he said to the groom, pointing an angry finger at my family. "I told you to be careful marrying into this family. I told you they were shallow, arrogant, and fake. They just publicly humiliated the one person in this city who holds the keys to our commercial funding." The groom looked down at the floor, completely silent. Chloe was sobbing into her wedding dress, clutching the $2 million deed against her chest like a shield. "Richard, please," my father begged, his voice cracking. He reached out to touch the billionaire's arm. "We can fix this. I'll call her. I'll make her apologize for causing a scene. I am her father. She will listen to me. If you ever speak to her again, you might just ruin my entire company," the billionaire interrupted, slapping my father's hand away. He walked over to the door, grabbed his coat, and looked back at my family one last time. "You listen to me very carefully, Richard," he said, his voice deadly serious. "You are going to fix this. You are going to get down on your knees, and you are going to beg that girl for forgiveness. Because if my company loses the Vanguard funding because of your arrogant, idiotic behavior tonight, I will personally see to it that this marriage is annulled, and I will make sure your family's business is destroyed in this city. Am I understood?" He didn't wait for a reply. He walked out of the lounge, slamming the heavy door behind him. My parents were left standing in the dead, suffocating silence of the VIP room. The grand, luxurious wedding they had spent months bragging about had just turned into a complete nightmare. They had finally realized that the poor, pathetic daughter they had thrown away was actually the billionaire they desperately needed to survive. And that is exactly why, when I woke up the next morning, my phone was absolutely flooded with missed calls. I woke up the next morning around 8 a.m. It was a beautiful, quiet Sunday. I was lying in my incredibly comfortable bed in the penthouse, listening to the soft hum of the city traffic far below. I felt so incredibly peaceful. There was no anger, no sadness, no lingering pain from the night before. When you finally realize that the people who hurt you have absolutely no power over your life anymore, you don't feel bitter. You just feel light. I stretched, got out of bed, and walked into the kitchen to make myself a cup of coffee. I hadn't checked my personal cell phone since I got into the Uber outside the wedding venue the night before. I had kept it on silent on my nightstand. I poured my coffee, walked over to the kitchen island, and finally picked up my phone. When I tapped the screen to wake it up, the phone actually froze for a second because it was trying to process the sheer volume of notifications that had flooded in overnight. I stared at the screen, genuinely shocked. 214 missed calls, 84 unread text messages, 32 new voicemails. They started coming in around 11:30 p.m. the night before, which is exactly when I figured Chloe must have opened the gift box. And they didn't stop. There were calls at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m. They had spent the entire night frantically dialing my number, like their lives depended on it. I scrolled through the text messages. They were all from my mother, my father, and Chloe. The shift in their tone from the night before was almost comical. My father's texts went from authoritative to completely desperate. "Emily, please call me back immediately. We need to talk. Emily, I know you're awake. Answer the phone. It's an emergency. Please, Emily, I am begging you. Just pick up the phone." My mother's texts were even worse. They were just pure, unadulterated panic. "We are so sorry. We didn't know. Please don't do this to us. Your sister's marriage is falling apart. Emily, they are going to ruin us. Please call me." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. I set the phone down on the marble counter, pressed the speakerphone button, and played the very first voicemail on the list. The audio started with a loud, chaotic background noise. It sounded like they were in a car. And then I heard my mother's voice. She wasn't using that cold, arrogant, high society tone she used when she kicked me out. She was hyperventilating. She was full-on ugly crying into the receiver. "Emily, please, please, pick up the phone," she wailed, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry for what happened at the venue. We made a terrible mistake. Your father was just stressed. We were all stressed. You have to call us back right now. Chloe's father-in-law is threatening to cancel the marriage. He says he's going to ruin our business if we don't fix this with you. Please, Emily, you have to tell him it was all a misunderstanding. We are your family. You can't let him destroy us." The voicemail beeped and ended. I just stood there in the quiet kitchen. They weren't apologizing because they felt bad for humiliating me. They weren't calling because they suddenly realized they loved their daughter. They were calling because the billionaire they had spent months kissing up to had just threatened to take away their money and their social status. They didn't want my forgiveness. They wanted my power. I looked at the phone. I knew that if I called them back and fixed the situation with the groom's father, they would immediately go back to treating me like a backup plan. They would use my company's name to boost their own ego in the city, and they would pretend the 5 years of abuse never happened. I picked up the phone. I didn't call my mother back. I didn't call my father. I dialed the private number for my head of security at the Vanguard Equity headquarters. "Good morning, Marcus," I said calmly. "I need you to do something for me." "Good morning, Miss CEO. Whatever you need," Marcus replied. "I am expecting some uninvited guests at the headquarters tomorrow morning," I said, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. "My parents. When they arrive, I do not want them turned away. I want you to escort them directly to the main executive boardroom on the top floor. Let them sit there and wait for me." "Understood, ma'am. Should I have security present in the room?" "No," I replied, a small, cold smile forming on my lips. "I want to handle this completely alone." I hung up the phone. They wanted to meet the CEO of Vanguard Equity Partners to save their miserable, fake little empire. Well, tomorrow morning, they were going to get exactly what they asked for, and I was going to make sure it was a meeting they would never, ever forget. Monday morning came, and I went to the office just like any other day. I wore a sharp, tailored navy blue power suit. I walked into my headquarters, grabbed a coffee from the executive lounge, and sat down at my desk. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9:15 a.m., my desk phone buzzed. It was Marcus, from security downstairs. "Miss CEO, your parents have arrived in the lobby. They are demanding to see you immediately. They say it's a family emergency." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Follow the instructions I gave you yesterday. Send them up to the main boardroom." "Right away, ma'am." I didn't rush. I finished reading an email, took a sip of my coffee, and let them sit in that boardroom for a solid 20 minutes. When you're dealing with arrogant people who are in a state of sheer panic, making them wait is the quickest way to strip away whatever tiny bit of fake confidence they have left. Finally, I picked up a single file folder from my desk, walked down the long, quiet glass hallway, and pushed open the heavy double doors of the executive boardroom. My parents were sitting at the far end of the massive mahogany table. They looked absolutely terrible. My father, a man who prided himself on always looking immaculate, had dark circles under his eyes, and his suit looked wrinkled, like he had slept in it. My mother looked even worse. She was nervously twisting a tissue in her hands, her eyes darting around the luxurious room. When the doors opened and I walked in, they both jumped up from their chairs like they had been electrocuted. "Emily!" my father practically shouted, taking a step toward me. "Thank God! Why didn't you answer your phone? We have been calling you for 2 days." I didn't answer him. I walked slowly to the head of the table, placed my folder down on the wood, and looked at them. I didn't offer a polite greeting. I didn't ask them to sit down. "You look stressed, Dad," I said quietly. My mother rushed forward, tears already welling up in her eyes. "Emily, please, you have to help us. You don't understand what's happening. Chloe's father-in-law, he's completely lost his mind. He called your father yesterday morning and said if we don't fix our relationship with you, he's going to pull all his company's investments out of your father's business. He said he'll ruin us." She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I smoothly pulled my hand back and crossed my arms. "He's going to bankrupt us, Emily," my father pleaded, his voice shaking. "We built that business from the ground up. You can't just let him destroy your family's legacy over a simple misunderstanding." "A simple misunderstanding?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Is that what we're calling it now?" I walked around the edge of the table, closing the distance between us. 2 days ago," I said, my voice dropping lower, completely draining the room of any warmth. "You stood in front of 400 people. You looked at my clothes with absolute disgust. You called me a poor, pathetic failure, and you ordered 2 armed guards to throw me out into the street. Was that a misunderstanding, Dad?" My father swallowed hard. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "Emily, I was trying to protect Chloe's wedding. The groom's family is very high class. They care about appearances. You showing up unannounced. I panicked. I made a mistake." "You didn't make a mistake," I said sharply, cutting him off. "You did exactly what you've always done. You judged my worth based on how much money you thought I had in my bank account. And the only reason you are standing in my office right now, crying and begging for my help, is because you suddenly realized my bank account is bigger than yours." My mother broke down into full, ugly sobs. "We're sorry. We are so, so sorry. We will do whatever you want. We will make a public apology. Just please, call him. Call Chloe's father-in-law and tell him we're a happy family. Tell him you forgive us. If you don't do this, Chloe's marriage is going to be ruined." I looked at my mother. The desperation in her eyes was almost suffocating. They genuinely thought I was going to cave. They thought that because I was their daughter, the emotional manipulation would finally work. I walked back to the head of the table. I opened the file folder I had brought with me and pulled out a single, heavily stamped legal document. "I already spoke to him," I said quietly. My parents froze. The crying instantly stopped. "What?" my father whispered. You spoke to him? When?" "This morning," I replied, sliding the legal document down the length of the table until it stopped right in front of them. He called my office to formally apologize on behalf of his security team for how I was treated at his son's wedding. He's a very smart businessman, Dad. He knows that Vanguard Equity Partners holds the keys to the commercial funding his company desperately needs. My father looked at the document on the table, his hands trembling. Did you tell him we made peace? Did you fix it?" I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the mahogany table. I looked directly into the eyes of the man who had banished me from his life 5 years ago. "No, Dad," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I told him that I have no family. I told him that Vanguard Equity does not do business with people who associate with toxic, manipulative, and abusive individuals." My mother let out a horrific gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. "I told him," I continued smoothly, "that if his company wants the $70 million funding package we discussed, he needs to sever all personal and professional ties with the Carter family immediately." My father stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the conference table. He looked like all the air had just been sucked out of his lungs. He realized, in that exact second, that I hadn't brought them up here to forgive them. I brought them up here to deliver the final blow. My father just stood there, completely paralyzed, staring at me like he couldn't comprehend the words that had just come out of my mouth. "Sever ties?" he whispered, his voice cracking. He looked like he was physically struggling to breathe. "Emily, you didn't do that. You couldn't have done that. If he severs ties with my company, the banks will call in all my loans. I will lose the business. I will lose the house. You just bankrupted your own father." "You bankrupted yourself, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice completely flat and steady. "You built an entire life on treating people like garbage, just because you thought you had more money than them. You threw your own daughter out into the street because she didn't fit into your perfect, fake little aesthetic. You don't get to act like a victim now, just because the math finally caught up to you." My mother practically lunged across the table. "But what about Chloe?" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Her husband's family is going to force them to annul the marriage. You are destroying your sister's life. How can you be so cruel?" I looked at my mother. The sheer hypocrisy of her calling me cruel was almost fascinating to witness. "Chloe's life isn't destroyed, Mom," I said softly. "I left her a gift at the wedding, didn't I? A fully paid-off, $2 million beach house. She has a safe, beautiful home that belongs entirely to her. If her new husband's family forces an annulment just because you two lost your money, then they never really loved her to begin with. She'll be fine. I made sure of it." My parents were completely speechless. They had absolutely no leverage left. They couldn't use Chloe to guilt-trip me because they knew I had already protected her. They couldn't use their money to intimidate me because I had infinitely more than them. And they couldn't demand respect because they had completely destroyed any right to it 5 years ago. They had absolutely nothing. My father looked down at the mahogany table. The great Richard Carter, who had spent his entire life demanding obedience from everyone around him, looked small, old, and utterly defeated. "So that's it then?" my father asked quietly, not even looking up at me. "You're just going to sit in your fancy glass tower and watch us lose everything?" "Yes," I answered simply. I didn't yell, I didn't gloat, I didn't feel the need to rub it in their faces. I just picked up my file folder from the table. "I didn't bring you up here to argue," I told them. "I brought you here to look you in the eyes and tell you that this is the absolute end of our relationship. Do not call my phone again. Do not show up at my building again. If you try to contact me, my legal team will file a harassment lawsuit before you can even finish dialing the number." My mother started to sob uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands. My father didn't move. I turned around and started walking toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom. "Emily, please," my mother wailed behind me. "We are your parents. We gave you life. You owe us." I stopped with my hand on the heavy brass door handle. I didn't turn around to look at them. I just looked at my reflection in the polished wood of the door. "You didn't give me a life, Mom," I said quietly into the empty room. "You gave me an ultimatum, and I survived it. We are officially done." I pushed the doors open, walked out into the bright, busy hallway of my company, and let the heavy doors click shut behind me. I left them sitting alone in that massive boardroom, surrounded by the crushing weight of their own ruined legacy. I walked straight to my private office, sat down at my desk, and let out a long, slow breath. For the first time in 5 years, my chest didn't feel tight. I didn't feel the lingering anxiety of wanting their approval. I was completely free. A few days later, the news hit the local business papers. The billionaire groom's family had officially pulled all their investments from my father's manufacturing company, and they made sure everyone in the city knew why. The ripple effect was instantaneous. In the world of high society, your reputation is your currency. The moment my father lost the backing of the city's biggest billionaire, the banks panicked. Creditors started calling in their loans all at once. Within weeks, the walls of my parents' fake empire completely caved in. They were forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on their massive, luxurious mansion to cover their outstanding debts. They went from being the untouchable elite of the city, sipping $1,000 champagne at weddings, to living in a cramped, 2-bedroom rented apartment on the outskirts of town. All of those wealthy friends who had laughed at me at the wedding venue, they completely stopped answering my mother's phone calls. They were entirely abandoned. They lost everything they valued most in this world. As for my sister, Chloe, the fallout from the wedding was incredibly messy. The groom's father was furious. He actively tried to pressure his son into annulling the marriage, telling him that associating with the Carter family was a massive liability to their brand. But this is where the story actually takes a beautiful turn. Chloe didn't fight with her in-laws. She didn't stay and try to protect my parents' non-existent status. She simply packed her bags, left the toxic mansion, and moved straight into the beach house I had bought for her. Her husband, the groom, was faced with a massive choice. He could stay with his billionaire father, or he could walk away with the woman he loved. He chose Chloe. He left his family's money behind and followed her to the beach house a few days later. It turns out, he actually loved her more than his family's wealth. They are now living a quiet, happy, peaceful life, away from all the high society madness. We even text each other every now and then. She finally understands what true family actually means. Sometimes, the universe has to completely break your heart just to push you toward your true potential. Walking away from the people who share your blood is the most agonizing thing you will ever have to do. But sometimes, using their doubt as your fuel is the only way you will ever survive. If you are listening to my voice right now, and you've made it this far into the story, I want to say a massive, heartfelt thank you. You stood by me through the heartbreak, the humiliation at the wedding, and the final revenge. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps this channel more than you can imagine. Make sure to subscribe if you're on YouTube, or hit that follow button if you're watching on Facebook, so you never miss another real-life story. And before you go, I have one final question for you. Tell me in the comments below, do you think I went too far by letting my parents lose everything? Or did they get exactly the karma they deserved? I'll be reading and replying to every single comment. Thank you for listening to my truth. Stay strong. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. And I'll see you in the next video.